I believe what you just spoke about has a lot to do with where they were actually there, they were on film, everybody
Yes.
remembers it, and then they're not there, and I believe we've got, kind of the Mandela effect happening because of the timelines, but it is interesting, because I think that also touches on, recently there's been some people or, I'll name one name, one of the witnesses to the Epstein, case.
Yes. Yes.
And it's
Yes.
like, okay, well, could there have been something else involved? If that's truly what happened, right? Could there have been
Right.
something else involved that would have gotten to her to do something? So I don't know if that's what went through your mind as soon as you read or heard
Oh,
about.
absolutely. I think that Epstein is infinitely more sinister than people can even comprehend. I mean, as bad and as dark, obviously, as human trafficking is, specifically with minors, the evidence suggests he was performing ritual magic with some of his victims. Years ago, I did a lecture on the self-replication of species. I went to different areas of the research, necronetics essentially. And one of the pathologies was something that would have the ability to appear as one thing to you and you're interfacing with it, then at any time could just retract its image. And now you're realizing I'm not in the presence of what I thought I was. This might not be human. I mean, it's obviously not who it appeared to be. And so that's when I got contacted by a production company that wanted to do an interview with me because they had just done an interview with Juliet Bryant, who was one of Epstein's victims. And Juliet Bryant her testimony pointed to, again, ritual magic, specifically a strain of Kabbalistic magic that was being performed upon some of his victims. And that was what Epstein Island was all about. That's why he had a ritual bath. That's why he had a replica of the tabernacle. Now, that's only if and when the phenomenon is plucked out of our own minds. But the phenomenon has, because you're getting to where, I'm getting to how, right? Because we're asking the same question different ways. There are case studies, like one of them, my friend Joshua Cutchin talks about in his book, Ecology of Souls, where someone is taken by the phenomenon, meets a person that says, oh, by the way, I died. This is uncomfortable. Especially, I died. Here's my name, my phone number, my address. I come back from the abduction. So-and-so died today. So that's something, again, that is not a projection of us. I have no knowledge you even exist, much less that you died, much less that you died today.
So I'm hearing what I would hear the, deliverance ministers
Yeah,
of today say, oh, well, that was just a demon, a familiar spirit that
yeah.
knew because they've been following the generational
Mhm.
bloodline. I'm curious,
I
like,
hope
what do
that's
you
the
tell those
case.
people?
Well, I hope that's the case. I mean, that would be amazing. How easy, right? That's just, blah, blah, blah. And the familiar spirit term, again, it gets abused, right? I was always told that's the familiar spirit. Okay, familiar in what way? There's two familiars in history. There's the familiar which they lean on, where it's like, oh yeah, well that was just an entity cultured and groomed by a practitioner, right? It's an animal or something, and then come to the practitioner, give them information, and that's one of their familiars. But there's a second familiar that people don't know about. This is from the work of T. Whitten Davies. For those who, again, the bibliophiles out there. Uh-oh. Nathaniel's making a book reference. Read it. Demonology among Hebrews and their neighbors.
Oh,
Familiars, specifically within necromancy. In one of the definitions, and they were called familiars, by the way, and it's actually the original term that was later on bastardized. The original familiar was a spirit that descended to Sheol, but was still familiar enough with this world to communicate with a necromancer.
okay. I did a deliverance workshop, oh gosh, a while ago about, I think it was demonology or something like that. I wish
Yeah.
I knew that. And I was like, because I researched, I go down, that book would have been really cool. But I remember finding something that in the familiar spirit, in the Hebrew, but also in the Greek, that connected it actually to a disembodied soul, a disembodied
There you
spirit, which
go.
also said soul. And I thought,
Yep.
oh my gosh, but again, unless we are willing to do the research,
Yeah, whenever.
we'll just go along with the narrative that the theology professor or the
Right.
Bible school professor told us, which those places are so infiltrated, it's not even funny.
No, and I don't enjoy that, to be honest with you. I don't enjoy that kind of research. Okay. Because again, everything that we've used to inform our perception of demonology it's evolving. Like in 2008, the University of Chicago employed a group of archaeologists to go to Turkey. It's called the Sincurli expedition. And so in the middle of one of their excavations, they uncovered a sarcophagi from this guy named Katamua, and it's called a Katamua inscription. And in his inscription, again, the only reason we know what our ancient ancestors believed is because they told us. That's really it. We're not imagining this. So, and mainly it's through material culture, which is commonly known as archaeology. And so they dug up this writing, and it's Katamua, and Katamua employs the Aramaic word nepes, which is the Hebrew word nefesh. And right, again, and so, but his concept was this. He said, my nefesh, nepes, will possess this sarcophagus.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that
And
is
so,
soul. That is, oh my
oh, I
gosh.
got chills, right? Let's go. And let's
Whoa.
go, right? High five. People, again, they're like, well, that's not what the Family Christian Bookstore says. It's like, right, because that's not up-to-date research.
Hey guys, welcome. I'm Anne Latour with Advocates of Heaven, and today I have a very special interview that I'm sharing with all of you. As most of you know, and have been following my channel, I have only done interviews with actually just a few students. But this one I had to do because it follows everything that I have been experiencing and fighting. And actually, very many people have been, they just didn't realize it. I hope you had a chance to look at the compilation of videos that I created with clips of Nathaniel's interviews. If not, you should go back and watch it because today we are going to dive very deep into the phenomenon that we've all been experiencing, knowingly or unknowingly, especially from the UAPs to UFOs to drones or demons, maybe fallen angels, watchers, reptilians, all of the supernatural things that people have been experiencing. We are going to go super deep. And in fact, I will share on this screen some of the terms that Nathaniel is referring to so you guys aren't completely lost. But before we begin, I'm going to pray briefly over this interview that I'm doing, as well as all of the listeners. So, Father God, I enter into your courtroom according to Hebrews 4 and 16. Thank you for this divine appointment with Nathaniel Gillis. We praise and thank you for sending your only begotten Son, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, Yeshua, for redeeming all of creation. I enter into your records the decree already established for this interview. We forgive ourselves and anything that we have done, said, heard, seen, thought about, or even anything that has taken us out of your good and perfect will, Father. We forgive ourselves and we forgive those that have trespassed against us or even plans to do harm against us or our loved ones. We receive your forgiveness according to 1 John 1 and 9, and we release forgiveness to all involved. I thank you, Father God, that you are tethering every composite and derivative of our body, soul, and spirit, our atomic, molecular, and ionic structures, all DNA, RNA, genomes, autosomes, and epigenetics, all of our alpha, beta, theta, delta, gamma, epsilon, lambda brainwaves, as well as our unconscious, subconscious, and conscious minds, and our realms, as well as all subatomic particles, including plasma, our frequencies, our physical and spiritual eyes, ears, mouth, and all of our senses, everything that is listed in Advocates of Heaven Composites and Derivatives document. I ask that you tether them all to King Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, and to the mind of the living God, according to 1 Corinthians 2 and 16, and establish dimensional walls as Zechariah 2 and 5 fires, as well as dimensional walls as Revelation 20 and 9 fires around each and every one of us. Tetelestai, and that's Greek for it is finished. Without further delay, I want to introduce you to Nathaniel Gillis, a former demonologist, and now he leads the industry of necronetics. I think I pronounced that right. And what I love about Nathaniel is that he is not afraid of a challenge or even to challenge a narrative, especially that whole narrative that not everything is a demon or that everything is a demon. So that takes a lot of humility to shift gears in long-time research of study that he's already done. Not many people are willing to do that. So Nathaniel Gillis, welcome.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to discuss the research with you.
So before we totally cannonball into the deep stuff, is there anything on your heart or your mind that you just kind of want to float out there first? I do have a lot of questions, but it's totally up to you if you have something that you want to start with.
So a long time ago, there was a researcher by the name of Giuffre. He wrote a series of books, but he came out with the theory that the phenomenon we're researching has a control mechanism employed. And that control mechanism has the ability to initiate researchers to initiate, we're already going deep, initiate experiencers of the paranormal into some kind of mystery school. And within this control mechanism, the phenomenon does and has proven to have the ability to take lives. That was one of the very first paradigms in my research that I came across because I was always taught, right, well, it can't happen. And, and at the same time, the phenomenon is targeting people like myself, people like another researcher, Fringe, Dr. Barry Fitzgerald, Steve Mera, and other researchers like us, even within the federal government. And not just targeting us, but in the early 1970s, there was a group of researchers that ended up in the desert, found deceased, allegedly committed unalived themselves. But you can edit that out. I don't want to get you demonetized, but we're already deep. And just to kind of help people understand where we are in the conversation, one of them was Dr. Rene Hardy. He had, I think, 250 patents. He was researching the paranormal phenomenon on Earth, the presence of some kind of species here among us. He was also found with a gun, deceased. The phenomenon had been pulling people, leading people, these researchers, into the desert, only for them to be found deceased, for the coroner to say, okay, well, this seems like an unaliving. Now, my point for everyone, this will shift the model very quickly and kind of push us into a conversation that I think we intended to have in general. And that is when Dr. Rene was buried, his funeral took place, obviously. His family, his friends, his colleagues all gathered at the funeral parlor. 6 very, very tall men entered the building, never talked to anybody, but the photographers vividly remember photographing them. They were on camera until they went to publish the photos. Nowhere to be found. So the current model, the model I inherited of the phenomenon, it just wants to kill, maim, deceive. Some of that is true. But my main point here is that there is something on this earth that is being employed by the phenomenon. You use one of my, I don't know if one of my terms of proto-intelligence is in the syllabus there, right? The dictionary,
It'll be
thesaurus
there.
rather. There, okay, there we go. But there is a species here on the earth that is orchestrating events with an intelligence out there in the ether. And my point here is that alone, at least for the model I grew up hearing, destroyed my paradigm. And I guess that's a good place to start. That if this was all love and light, why is it that when people get too close to the truth, they're instantly removed, they're threatened? Barbara Bartholic, taken by the phenomenon, you're due for an adjustment. Dr. Carla Turner, instantly, like out of nowhere, an aggressive cancer formed in her body. So that's a good foundation, at least to start. It's not all love and light. There's something deeply malevolent here. That's not the question. The question is, what kind of model of malevolence are we dealing with? Are they embodied? Are they replicating? And that's the essential principle of necronetics.
Whoa. Okay. So yeah, we are starting deep. You were the first one to cannonball. So
I'm sorry. Yeah,
no,
it's the
that's what
habit.
this is meant for. So actually, I have something that we'll touch on that because
Mhm.
we'll get to that because I believe what you just spoke about has a lot to do with where they were actually there, they were on film, everybody
Yes.
remembers it, and then they're not there, and I believe we've got kind of the Mandela effect happening, but consciously. And I do have, I'm going to get to that, but I kind of want to like warm our listeners up just a little bit because of the timelines. But it is interesting because I think that also touches on, recently there's been some people or, I'll name one name, one of the witnesses to the Epstein, case.
Yes. Yes.
And it's
Yes.
like, okay, well, could there have been something else involved if that's truly what happened, right? Could there have been
Right.
something else involved that would have gotten to her to do something? So I don't know if that's what went through your mind as soon as you read or heard
Oh,
about.
absolutely. I think that Epstein is infinitely more sinister than people can even comprehend. I mean, as bad and as dark, obviously, as human trafficking is, specifically with minors, the evidence suggests he was performing ritual magic with some of his victims. Years ago, I did a lecture on the self-replication of species. I went to different areas of the research, necronetics essentially. And one of the pathologies was something that would have the ability to appear as one thing to you and you're interfacing with it. Then at any time could just retract its image. And now you're realizing I'm not in the presence of what I thought I was. This might not be human. I mean, it's obviously not who it appeared to be. And so that's when I got contacted by a production company that wanted to do an interview with me because they had just done an interview with Juliet Bryant, who was one of Epstein's victims. And Juliet Bryant her testimony pointed to, again, ritual magic, specifically a strain of Kabbalistic magic that was being performed upon some of his victims. And that was what Epstein Island was all about. That's why he had a ritual bath. That's why he had a replica of the tabernacle. Fascinating stuff, but very sinister. And I do believe that's the case. I mean, there's a reason why our government is willing to do anything and everything but release the details and the client list. And so there is, again, it's almost like in the darkest recesses of all of crime, it seems that there's this kind of occult connection to where it's not just debauchery and just the debased nature of humanity. There's a ritual aspect of it. There's a ceremonial trait to it, to where it's not just hurting, but there's a pathology. And I'm doing this for another order of being. And so it's when that connection's made that we really stumble into the darkness and realize I thought it was bad enough.
Right, right. Okay, well, this is a good place to kind of like jump in again because what you're talking about, when I think about it, it really goes back to when I've just from what I've personally experienced since going deep within this ministry and going after the soul and going after the deliverance of our soul.
Mhm.
I did a lot of research and I've published a couple books about the garden and everything that I see when I'm reconciling what is going on in this world and what happened in the beginning, right? I reconcile everything to the words of Jesus, the words of Yeshua, to the beginning as well, to the garden, right? So
Mhm.
God created, for how I was seeing it, is that God created everything, right? Because I believe that what we are dealing with has actually always been around. And there's
Mhm.
two different things that happened in the garden that I'm going to touch on before we really, really, really go deep. But one of the first things I kind of wanted to start with is, while I was writing my Deliverance of the Soul course, this is the course that started kind of just going and processing our soul. Like, let's
Mhm.
go and process the trauma. I saw that in the King James Version, the English word for said, the
Mhm.
SAID, the English word for said, but also the English word for called, had two different distinctive meanings in Hebrew. And this is what aligns with also the Testament of Reuben. So when it comes to
Yes.
the manifestation of our thoughts, the word said means to think in one's heart. And then the
Mhm.
word called actually means to speak aloud. So when I was reading about the creation days, that first week of the creation days, God thought about everything in his heart. When he created all within his heart, his thoughts first, and
Mhm.
then he called it and he spoke it forth. But not all of it, because he had Adam, right? He had Adam
Mhm.
call the animals forth. When it's like, we have to really be conscious when we're reading scripture to see, wait a minute, there's something going on here. So he has Adam
Mhm.
call manifest the animals, which God had already created. He had already
Right.
created basically in another dimension. So when Adam was aligned with the heart of the Father and God's will, then he was able to speak those animals, the beasts of the field. He was able to speak all of these forth. So it went from one dimension, basically the Father's heart, to another dimension, because I believe everything is dimensional.
Mhm.
So since we are in God's image and we have this same ability, and it all starts in our thoughts, right?
Mhm.
And then the New Testament, or not the sorry, not the the Testament of Reuben, also
Mhm.
refers to this, because the women thought about the watchers. And then it actually says, oh, I was going to bring it up here. I'll have to, maybe I'll have to grab it. I'll put it in here. The women thought, um, they were seeing the watchers. It says that
Mhm.
women thought about the watchers when they were having sex with their husbands.
Mhm.
Then they gave birth to giants with
Right.
the corrupted seed. But even before Genesis 6, we'll call that the Genesis 6 incident, Adam and Eve partook of the evil tree, which was knowledge, right?
Mhm.
And then that word actually translate to meaning of perception. So an understanding of wisdom, the understanding of evil, and then the Hebrew translations of the word evil actually means that the mind is vicious. What this is one of the translations of evil, is
Mhm.
the mind is vicious. So I kind of
Mhm.
personally believe that partaking of that evil tree, they took on the seed of rebellion, right? And at that point, it's like they had this knowledge of everything opposite of what God, their creator, is or will or would be, right? Everything opposite of God,
Mhm.
including procreation, because now this gets down to the seed, right? So the
Mhm.
question would be that, could this phenomenon be the darkness that was already in the earth?
Mhm.
And that is why God said, don't eat from that, which then the word eat actually means to consume. So not necessarily
Yeah.
food, right? Could the phenomenon be what maybe even entered into Eve, causing her to transgress, or maybe even the serpent, right? Because
Mhm.
when we look at those words, we see that they were actually having a thought to thought communication. They were not speaking aloud.
Yes,
So,
that's huge in the Jewish mythology. You're correct in the sense that, and I'll tell you what, here's the big lie, right? You shall be God as gods, you shall be gods, knowing the difference between good and evil, knowing good and evil. And it's like, well, we already thought we knew that. Disobeying God's evil. Well, no, there's a new definition there. You're going to know the difference. You're going to know. You're going to be like Him. Okay, I'm going to be like my Creator. And I think that's the biggest lie. And even to your point, now this gets even deeper than probably we intended. If is dealing with the seed. If I may kind of pick that out and kind of zoom in and kind of explain it. The issue, even with the Sethite model of Genesis 6, is if it were just the husbands, there was no supernatural event, or there wasn't a separate entity present, how would it have produced a giant? There's a mutation there. And then you kind of get into some of the early demonological works where was it a separate entity taking on the guise of the husband? And why is it, and even, and I mentioned this earlier in our context earlier on this, the Gnostic version of that, it was a unique pathology that I ignored. I thought, no, I don't like that at all, right? And then when I started working on these cases, it's kind of the same thing you're mentioning. Is this okay? Does it make sense? Okay.
Oh, totally.
So
Yeah, because I feel like we're gonna go down maybe even the
yeah,
metaphysical DNA that could
yeah,
possibly be okay. Okay, awesome.
there we go. Yeah. So because that was a we could have went everywhere with that. That was a fascinating subject matter. So it's like another show, maybe another show. But yeah, so dealing with the seed, one of the earliest demonological arguments was, do spirits have seed? And if they do, what kind of secretions and excretions were collected by demonologists throughout history? Is there a connection with that and the occult? Is it possible, which I pose it is, that what they were performing was not just a metaphysical event, it was an occult transference, it was a ritual. And in this ritual, it's sleep paralysis, hypnosis, staring into they call it in some cases it's the ghostly glare, staring into the eyes of the entity as the moment of insemination takes place. I've had cases like this, and that's what I'm saying, right? It's like, okay, one thing for me to read it 1,000 years ago, it's another thing to step in homes, right? And say, okay, like, what are we dealing with here? So I've had cases where all of those pathologies are present, even to the extent of pregnancy and the missing fetus syndrome. Now, the main pathology I would kind of highlight is the hovering above the experiencer to the point where it's eye to eye. I had one husband that reached out to me at his wits' end. He didn't know what to do or what to say anymore. This entity was grooming his wife. And it was to the point now where he's getting off work, and what used to be a nighttime event where she's asleep and it's a nightmare is now where she's a waking event. It's an interfacing activity. She's awake in bed, paralyzed. The only thing she could communicate to her husband, who was right there, was, honey, he's right over top of me. So, in my research of what's called necronetics, a self-replication of species, I study the seed secretions, anything that is produced by these entities. So, to begin with what they're doing, it's not sleep paralysis alone. Some researchers go down that road. Oh God, and that's fine. It's one aspect of the ritual. But what happened is early on in the pathology, we started collecting sigils that were present with the secretions. Right.
What
Which the go ahead.
so this actually kind of so that would actually kind of make sense when it comes to the soul, right? Because
Mhm,
the soul is what manifests through the physical body. So the body is what our soul believes. So if there's
mhm,
something that has intertwined, even maybe even at the subatomic, like atomic level of her body, or maybe it
mhm,
wasn't her that had the sigils, but maybe there's something that's present that basically what I've experienced at times too is that astral projectors can astral project in our space, right? In our
mhm,
physical realm, but they can also astral project into our soul realm.
mhm.
So
Yes, yes.
yeah. So that's interesting with the sigils, right? How then it
Mhm,
manifests on the body. So,
right.
oh, sorry.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I guess I'm in your wheelhouse, my friend. So yeah,
That's
early on
why
the
I
model,
contacted you.
I know, right? That the early on, yes, it was purely a spiritual model of the phenomenon where these were demons, these were etheric, or these were astral entities, and but the pathology is unique in that people were witnessing these entities, flesh and blood, and the rituals they were performing. This is a mind blower for me because it shifted my paradigm. The rituals they were performing were either given to them by another species. We can hypothesize as to what they are, but the rituals they were employing were the byproduct of the occult here on Earth. So, for instance, in Father Sinister Avamita's research, he was going into homes within an hour of the entity manifesting. To the experiencer, it was a series of events, stages of a ritual. I thought it's physical or spiritual till I wake up the next day and there are physical scars on my body. There are bruises that directly correlate with what I thought was just a nightmare. So that means she was induced into a dream state. And this is where we get the legend of the mythology of the dream demon. It's purely astral. It's just an entity. It's a spiritual being. And yet the being itself was leaving secretions on their bodies where they were collecting it. And this is fascinating. But at the same time that they were collecting secretions on the bodies of these experiencers, the phenomenon was witnessed hovering over recently deceased men in their freshly dug graves.
So it's almost as if maybe they're collecting the soul or even
Yep.
parts of the soul, and then they're using that as a form of energy, a form of movement in the spirit realm because they don't need They don't need a demon. They don't need something else because the soul
right?
is spirit. It is a spirit being.
Yes. So what I'm pointing at here is that these practitioners, whatever they are, I still don't have a real term. They were directly working hand in hand with the proto-intelligence, the phenomenon, where, and this is the connection that demonology made with respect to paranormal, where it wasn't okay, yeah, no, these were practitioners performing rituals on these experiencers. And the phenomenon was harvesting the same secretions from recently deceased men that were being left on experiencers. Okay. To the point, my friend, that Sinistraria of Amino thought that, okay, this is from a dead person.
When you're saying secretions, are you talking about like the sperm, or is that what you're talking
Absolutely.
about?
Absolutely. So this
Mm.
is one of the big arguments of demonology was how can it be preserved by spirit? How can a spirit secrete that? And then in addition to that, my friend, now Sinistraria is pulling back the eyelids of victims that died from their event. Beneath the eyelids were sigils. So they were sigilized as they were being inseminated. Now, where does that come from? That comes from a gentleman by the name of Austin Osman Spar. He's an occultist. He's long dead now. But in his philosophy of sigilization, it comes through chaos magic. That is, that at the moment of insemination, I'm breaking down just a way. At the moment of insemination, when the sigils are carved into the experiencer's body, it will inform and influence the fetus they're being inseminated with. The body, this is fascinating to me, the body will absorb the sigilization, activate the sigils, and the sigils, by through the intent of the practitioner, the occultist, will shape the fetus within. And then at the moment of the phenomenon's choosing, the practitioner's choosing, the sigilization will have already went through the embracing of it, the activation of them, and then at the very end, the expulsion of the sigils themselves. At the end of the ritual, she's impregnated with an entity. Back into the 16th century, if I may, when the incubi really showed its teeth, when the sexual pathology emerged for the first time, and we married possession with pregnancy, what they uncovered is a species that was doing the same thing. I'm a dream demon. Don't worry about it. Give me consent. Of course, I'm your husband. Why wouldn't I be? Or like the case I had in India, I'm your deceased, your deceased boyfriend or something. But when everything was said and done, they go to work thinking, okay, that was just a nightmare. Whew, thank God that wasn't real. The same bruises appear on their body, the same, right, same symbols. But now they're possessed with consciousness. They're having multiple voices coming out of it at the same time. And it even got down to the point where the exorcists themselves noticed that there were two pulses in the same body, two heartbeats in the same body, and that the entity that had possessed them also impregnated them. To take it a step further, their revelation in demonology was that the same entity that impregnated them was the same entity they were pregnant with. So there was a practitioner replicating, self-replicating through their wombs.
Yeah, that's not a demon.
No,
We're giving
right?
demons too much credit. I mean, come on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Exactly right. My friend, that is a highly evolved occultist. And I have the grimoire in my library. I have the ritual. And guess what it includes? Okay. The adept induces a woman into a dreamlike state. Check. Hovers over her body. Occult transference. Check. Sigilization. Check. Secretions. That's why. Whose secretion? It's his. Right. And what I had to do was really deconstruct some of what I really believed. And I thought, wait a minute, this makes much more sense. And I know that it may not make sense to many people, and I get it. But my point here, and this is exactly what I was referring to before when I mentioned the deceased scientists, when these beings walked into the funeral home, everybody took pictures, everybody saw them. There's no proof. I believe that's who we're talking about, is a species here on Earth that, if I may say, have created bodies. Now, they could have been pre-incarnate and postmortem. That's another model worth considering. But to even have this conversation, I applaud you because not many people would be willing to even entertain this without wanting to burn me at the stake.
No, we need to have this conversation. This conversation needs to go, like, people need to be able to listen and also be able to, like, chew on it, right? You know,
Yeah.
and I also suggest that to those that listening right now, when you're maybe having some cognitive dissonance, that just, take a step. First, most important thing is forgive yourself of any fear, because what happens is there's that, and I went through it, and I'm sure you went through it, Nathaniel, as well, is
Absolutely.
that there's that, like, wait a minute, everything that I've been believing about this is wrong, possibly could be wrong. There's
Perhaps.
this fight, this battle where you just want to shut down. I know when I first kind of processed this, I did a lot of sleeping, and then I had to deliver those soul fragments that were like, just sleep this off. It's okay. You'll wake up, it'll be fine, which is like a whole nother thing. We'll get to that, what happens in our sleep. But it's interesting what you were talking about with the secretions and basically the seed of this entity that could be here. And I
Mhm,
have actually a story, I'll share it a little bit later, about somebody that came into my ministry, and she so happened, I'll call her a she, but I believe it was an entity. I believe it's everything that you're talking about.
mhm,
And I'll kind of give that story a little bit later. But first, because I wanted to kind of touch on the secretions portion, but also the seed, because in going back to the garden again, like in the beginning, with the fall in the garden, that it talks about in scripture that Adam knew his
there we
wife
go.
Eve, right? It's like there's this new, and this is after they were removed from the garden, right? Then they
Mhm,
had Cain, and then they had Abel. And then something I was thinking about is that at the moment of conception, there is what is called a flash of light, or the
mhm,
scientists will call it a zinc spark, a possible, like, I'll call it a possible signature of that spiritual activation of life that is happening when the sperm meets the egg. And it's actually
mhm,
measured. I did some also deeper research, and it's actually seen also with mammals. So it's not just with humans, it's also with mammals. So I believe that the consciousness of the fallen world, that happened in the garden, and then everything going down from that, is downloaded into that life form at the moment of conception.
mhm,
Um, of then as the fetus grows, right, then
mhm,
the epigenetics then forms that life, through culture and all those other things, right, that shapes that life form, which is all of us, right.
mhm,
And I was thinking, gosh, it could probably be this phenomenon. And we know that Adam was not created from sperm, and
mhm.
neither was Jesus. So, curious
There we
to
go.
know your thoughts, right, on the possibility of maybe the collective consciousness, the
Mhm.
fallen world consciousness, right? All the evil being downloaded into our soul at the moment of conception.
I think there's evidence to suggest that. Now we're getting into the seed war, right? As it's so often termed in our, at least the evangelical movement. And the research I and others have done, it kind of informed, and obviously informed our perception of what's actually going on in the field, the phenomenon specifically. And that is that dealing with Incubus, Genesis 6, it's the incarnation of something. Specifically dealing with incubi literature, the question was always asked by the female experiencer, if that wasn't my husband, who was the father? And if it wasn't my husband who I was intimate with, then who and what am I pregnant with? And so, based upon the phenomenology behind the proto intelligence, it seeks altars, not just altars, but specifically altars in the desert. These are high places in the groves that the Bible talks about. It does and has manifested to the performance of ritual magic, ceremonial magic, and specifically ritual sacrifice, not just animal either. It seeks to be worshipped. Again, one of my mentors specifically looked me in my eyes in England and said, make no mistake, Nathaniel, there was a species that demanded him and his research partner, demanded both of them, right? They're not green behind the ears in the field. They're very experienced researchers.
Sounds like
And it
Lucifer.
told them to bow down and to worship them. You're looking at all of this phenomenology that really sets the foundation for what's going on. Altars, worship, insemination. This does, and I'm leading to a point here, I promise. It does point us in the direction of ancient deities or ancient beings that believe they're deities or want to ascend. And in order to do so, look what they're doing. They're creating their own prophets, their own seed, right? Their own bloodline, their own altars. And most importantly, and a lot of Christians don't pay attention to this because they read Paul's gospel and just split off. And oh, that sounds good, you know. And he begins and ends with saying, if there's another Jesus. No, Pauline Christology says, I have betrothed you. This always gets me worked up. Betrothed you to one, and you're looking for another. I got chills. If another one that looks like the one comes, we're thinking Antichrist. Oh, he's anti all of that. No, 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 no. He's the incubus. He's the one that manifests in the image of the husband, right? And then it gets even down to this where Paul mentions, it's so incredible. If you receive another spirit, which you have not received. In other words, there can't be another if there isn't an original.
Right.
Or Yeshua if there isn't an original Yeshua. And I'm extremely passionate about this. And this is, and again, I told this story on the confessionals where if we kind of summarized everything he's talking about, it's even mentioned by Yeshua in that day, many shall come to me saying, have we not done all of these things in your name? It's fascinating where Paul says, okay, if you've received another spirit, where are we doing these miracles from? That other unction, that other unclean unction, my friend.
The
In
counterfeit.
unclean, absolutely, the unclean utterance of an unclean spirit that wants everything that same way Yeshua, Yahweh does. Anyways, going down this kind of thread here, Paul says, yeah, if you've received another gospel, right, another Jesus, another Yeshua. As a matter of fact, it's on the topic of another unction, another spirit that you have not received. You fast forward, you have Yeshua. Many in that day, they'll come to me saying, "Have we not performed all these miracles in your name?" And he says, "I never knew you. I never yada yada." The Hebrew word. We were never intimate. That's what it means. We were never intimate. It's help them understand. We're getting right back to the heart of the issue. If that was not Yeshua the church has been intimate with, then what spirit are we pregnant with? What are we replicating? Right? And so this is the heart, again, this is the heart of the incubus. But that's more to my point. And so what the phenomenology tells us, it's giving us a pathology that cannot be ignored. And when people, and this is my issue with it, it's like, okay, yeah, we can talk about Genesis 6. I want to, I love to. If we include all of the other things, because that's literally the backdrop. That's not the end. That's the beginning, right? That's the canvas upon which we paint the reality of the 21st century. And so, have you?
100%. Like I get passionate about that too, because the blueprint of the enemy is this counterfeit.
Here we
Create
go.
an illusion that becomes a distraction. And I believe that there has been something that's taken the body of Christ, whatever you want to call it, the church, the Christians
Mhm.
off path just enough in the Genesis 6
Just a little
theory,
bit.
just enough to make it sound and feel like the real thing. And
Right.
yet what we're dealing with is literally what you're talking about right now.
Yes. And if I may be very transparent, as a researcher, it pains me because the phenomenon will take those narratives, right? And it will incarnate these archetypes. And then people will have conferences, sell t-shirts, they'll commercialize all of this. Nothing wrong with that, of course, as long as it's good research, not realizing that the phenomenon is using illiteracy and ignorance to hide behind. Sure, I'll be that to you. Thank you for the suggestion. And then it goes and literally, it adds manifestation to the illiteracy and furthering their own delusions. And so myself and others, it's like, all right, there's mythology, and I'm not a mythicist, by the way. Mythicist, that's just folklore. That never happened. It's just, fairy tales. I believe it did happen. But again, whatever we're dealing with, it's not static, it's not monolithic, it's fluid. It has evolved. And so it might not evolve in its pathology, right? Altars, self-replication, hybridism, all of that, worship, but it's evolved in the way it's manifest. I mean, I've had cases, my friend, where people are like, well, and this is how I snuck out the phenomenon. Well, I saw a demon. I'm like, okay, that's fascinating. Tell you it's a demon? Absolutely told me it's a demon. Okay, well, what did it look like? And it proceeds, right? Proceeds to describe something, number one, that never existed, right? It was literally fabricated by someone like Slenderman. Just, oh yeah, by the way. And the phenomenon inhabits that archetype to interface with the experiencer. That experiencer goes away saying, hey, listen, this entity actually exists.
Sounds like UFO, Bigfoot, all
Oh my
these different
God.
things.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Incredible. Yes. And to your point, yes. And it's like, okay, but what did you see before they saw for you? What did you experience before they reinterpreted it in your mind? And this is why it's so important that we do not have abductions of Yahweh. Why? Because there's no archetype to manifest as. There's no image. And what's so fascinating to me, my friend, is if you go through all of ancient idolatry, all of the idols in biblical antiquity, you stumble upon somebody who says, don't even give me an image. Why? Muhammad's abducting people. Sometimes Jesus is. But even the Jesus that is abducting people is a white man with, kind of a beard. It just kind of looks like, um, what did Mark Lowry say? Ted Nugent, right? I don't know if you know Mark or not.
No, I
Ted
know what
Nugent.
you're talking about. I know what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
right?
Yeah, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same. They all say, yeah,
Archetype.
when they describe him. Yeah. It's the
But
architect. Yeah.
there we go. Yes, it's so yeah, it's all right. You're certainly not that, right? He's a Jewish rabbi at least. So get familiar with, So my point here is that yes, and if we don't understand it, if we're not honest with the data set, then in the gap of either illiteracy or perhaps malevolent dishonesty, in that space between, the phenomenon will inhale and exhale. It will come to life. And now we'll have people propagating something that really doesn't exist. And it's just a lie to get us to look one way while it proceeds to do everything it wants to do. Does that make sense at all?
100%. 100%. Totally. Yeah. So interesting. When we come across this, basically self-replication of species, and you had said something in maybe at least one interview that I watched. I might have watched all of yours. I like I said, I put together that our viewers can go watch. I put together some of the best like clips. And then all the links to the
Thank
full
you.
interviews will be there too. But
Thank you.
one of the things that you had said is that there was that ritual blueprint
Mhm.
across the board in the paranormal, in demonology, and ufology, right? Um,
Right.
all pertaining to a particular ritual. Um, so I'm curious, was that ritual involving sex? I'm assuming yes, but I thought I would
Yes,
just be clear.
100%.
Okay.
100%. And now I'm collecting cases where alleged men in black are performing the same rituals on women. And so the sexual pathology is and has always been surrounding the female. Always. Angels, demons, ghosts, incubi, all of that. And we do have some cases of succubus or succubi entities, but far less than incubi. I mean, incubi are it's pervasive. And so that's what led me. Yeah, of course. It's the even down to, let's say, sleep paralysis and what's called uninformed consent. I have oh my God. So I went down that kind of rabbit hole of the ritual. It's called the ultimate black mass. And the golden bow of James Fraser, he's an anthropologist, he calls it the red right. It's literally an embodied sorcerer. Now, where he got that first body, we can only speculate. That's another data point rather. And so it's an embodied sorcerer that at the end of his life, if he can still procreate, even down to the very end of his life, and this is necronetics, he will inseminate and he will perform a ritual over that woman. And I mentioned this earlier, sigilization. This is very dark stuff, unfortunately. Sigilization at the moment of conception. It'll take over that fetus as its own body. No wonder they asked the experiencer, who's the father of what I'm carrying? It's not the entity it's not the archetype. It's the entity wearing that mask. That is a pathology that is so unique that even when they cannot, and I know this is crazy, even when they fail to merge their consciousness with that new fetus, even when they dispatch of it, and I hate to say it like that, it's even done in a ritualistic way. Like there is a case that Dr. Turner had, I mentioned this in an interview the other day, where in my session, um, they perform the ritual, matter could not merge with memory, so the child dies, a hybrid, not one of ours, one of theirs, right? It dies. The hybrid mother goes into the bathroom, passes it, holding in her hands. The phenomenon commandeers her own consciousness. This is only witnessed through memory regression. Okay, do you remember this? Oh my God, yeah, this is what I did. She put it in a glass jar and buried it. Didn't know where she buried it, but she did. Now, this is Paracelsus research. This is a homunculus where he was using again the semen from deceased people to create a hybrid, and he would put them in glass jars. So and I've got evidence now where there are some cases where the upports, which people aren't familiar with that because I wasn't at one time either, the phenomenon will literally manifest things in a house where it just I can go down that rabbit hole too. It's really freaky,
Go for
but it
it.
happened. Okay, well, one of my good friends, and I'll side note, and I'll go back to this port thing. One of my good friends, Steve Mara, is a dear friend of mine. Anyways, he has cases where apports would manifest. So we had one case study where there was like a collection of coffee mugs. They came like from Costco or something, and they were together. And one of them, as a white coffee mug, went missing. Family couldn't find it. I know we had four, we only have three, something like that. They couldn't find it anywhere. And suddenly it shows up on the kitchen counter. Like, oh yeah, well, the wife's like, honey, I already cleaned the kitchen. We don't have any kids. What's that? That's what is it? Phenomenon materialized it. So he went there, put it on a microscope. There was an isotopic difference in the isotopes between the mug that was taken, because he had others to look at that were in the collection, and the mug that was returned. They appeared the same, but they weren't. That is an apport. And so now I have cases, even one of Dr. Carla Turner's old cases before she died, where the same women that were being inseminated were being given money, where the phenomenon was materializing money into their homes. That is a part of the ritual, my friend. So I'm suggesting here that many of these, specifically dealing with hybridism, is something beyond. Perhaps we can't see it, we can't perceive it, but it is real. This is profundity here, okay? When it manifests, it is real, but only as long as it lasts. And so that's what we're dealing with. And this is what it's leading. This is why, again, in demonology, they had such an issue. Is it a demon, or is it, if it is a demon, then the only kind of incarnation or embodiment of a demon we know of would just be possession. But then Malachi Martin, a great exorcist from the Vatican, came out and said, no, there's also called perfect possession. What's that? And he said, perfect possession is when you have like a Catholic deacon, or you have, a school teacher or a doctor in for 50 years. This entity has worn him as what's called a social skin. And then out of nowhere, a murder takes place. He said that entity has worn that person his whole life and nobody knew it. It's perfect possession.
Sounds
What
like some people in government right now. I
I
don't
was going to
know.
say that. Absolutely, right. Check. Yeah, so that was always the argument. And so what necronetics does is it takes it a step further. Now I'm connecting possession and pregnancy to where, yes, whatever these beings are now have bodies. And for the longest time, that was the most pronounced disconnect between demonology and ufology. I had MUFON directors emailing me like, hey, listen, Nathaniel, I like your research, but, and here it is. Oh, okay, let's do this real quick. Hey, I got you, right? I got your nose. Let's get over here, young man. You don't know what you're talking. And it was always, well, they don't have bodies, they're spirits. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you're operating off an old model, and not even a well-informed model, a model, right, that wasn't even rooted in the phenomenology. And so that's what I'm kind of like, again, bringing this into a conversation that we need to really examine this, because the rituals they are performing are rituals that were given and authored by practitioners on earth, which question, right? That's where the origin of the question is. Okay, are these demons? I'm not suggesting they don't exist, or are these practitioners that are literally creating bodies to inhabit? And if that's the case, then now we introduce a new species on earth, which would explain, like, it's, again, that is the ultimate hybrid, which would explain how they're with us but absent from us at the same time, to where they could walk in to funerals. Yeah, they're observed, but it's a highly evolved sorcerer species of them, who, sure, you can look at them, talk to them, not realizing that they're working with a proto-intelligence that, yes, it'll wipe them from everybody's memory. Yeah, you'll remember you took a picture, but it may or may not have ever happened. So again, I guess my point here is there is something embodied on Earth, and there's a proto-intelligence working with them, and it's the direct opposite model of biblical antiquity, at least of, right? We have our prophets, they have theirs. There's going to be a communication, and let the God that answers by fire be God. And this is my opinion, that is where we are being led, not by the propaganda, but by the specific and most ancient pathology of the phenomenon. This is what I want, bar none. And in return, I'll give you anything your heart desires.
So they know these women, they want the money, they want jewels. This goes into, and we'll get to that eventually. This
Yeah.
goes into some of the false prophets out there and these conferences, they're manifesting
Oh my God.
things, it's like, and this all comes from the soul. Like the soul is the part I believe is what manifests, right? So,
Mhm.
so actually going back to the garden, last question when it comes to the garden, um, I've been actually sitting with this theory that perhaps the watchers, or maybe the luminaries, maybe
Mhm.
they're the same thing. The watchers and luminaries were once created to be our celestial bodies. which would have been like God's intention for all of mankind, that we would inhabit these actual, celestial bodies that are all light. But then we lost it due to the fall, due to knowing rebellion and having that knowledge of rebellion. That personally, I was thinking that we will receive those celestial bodies with a manifestation of the sons of God, as scripture talks about it, right?
Mhm.
And within that, the luminary, or some people refer to them as stars, right? You hear that a
Right.
lot in New Age, or the destiny blueprints could be a part of that luminary, that it actually might hold the key to the mind of God. Now I'm talking about the real thing, not the
Mhm.
counterfeit. And then when we are connected to our God destined souls, or even this, it becomes this direct access to the mind of God. I'm curious to see what you think on that.
So there is a mystical tradition within Judaism that weaves a tale. Our species, Adam and Eve, I should say, were light bodies, in that the skin that Yahweh put on them was our skin that we have. That's one theory. And it does kind of play into, I've mentioned this in times past, I'm still fleshing it out for some contextual framework. But I think all this points to the ancient understandings of what consciousness is to us species. Number one, you trace this epic. Again, it's a what was it called? A neighboring culture, some of the neighboring concepts of the soul. The ghost of a man is made from the flesh of a god. That was one of their philosophies. I'm not talking about the Bible. I'm talking about some of the neighboring religions, and it kind of informed and influenced their understanding of the angelic. What was an angel? Well, the first time we heard angelos, again, it's a Greek interpretation. It's what's called a dialectical allomorph in linguistics, not to get like super heady and nerdy and stuff. But anyways, dialectical allomorph, which means you can have the same different definitions, but different spellings. And so if you get to the Hebrew word for angel was malakima or malakim, plural. Now, that's what's called a borrowed loan word from the Ugaritic text found in ritual bowls. This is a game changer for me. And it came from a word called a malakuma, not malakim, malakuma. And the way that these people employed that word told anthropologists and linguists what they really meant. One argument as to what an angel is a deceased ancestor or a formerly human being. And what they were dealing with was the process of birth, life, death, and then the emergence of what they consider. Now, again, this is just a discussion. I'm not saying I believe this. People be like, oh, really? Go get that steak. We got to do something. But the emergence of what they would call the ghost gods, pre-incarnate and post-mortem, merged into one model of consciousness. And so this is why even in the book of Enoch, it's fascinating where Enoch became an angel. Metatron. How does that happen? How can a living person, right, become an angel? It's the same way. It's fascinating. It's the same way that Samuel was called an Elohim with the Witch of Endor. He's a god. I see a god coming out of the earth. Now, people, especially evangelical circles, and I get the emails, right? Oh, that's a familiar spirit. That Hebrew word for familiar spirit is never employed, ever. Now, it has been employed in times past. Exodus, Leviticus, right? Numbers. Never in this particular case. Number two, the Bible explicitly says that Saul went through the whole kingdom, my friend, and killed all the sorcerers and witches. I guess she's alive, right? You start to see again, it was a complete deconstruction of my model. And one of the proponents of this that really just drove the nail into that coffin for me is Professor Astor Mori. She is a Jewish Bible scholar out of the Union Theological Seminary in New York. She has a book called Women's Divination in Biblical Literature, just for the bibliophiles out there. And that, my friend, is when I started looking at this and I think, man, there's something really off here. Because, and this is what necronetics teaches, it gets a founding principle that before the female can conceive in her womb what that entity is in semen, she has to see its true form. She has to perceive it. I'm not talking about the observer effect manifesting the archetype. I mean, and this has been witnessed in case studies, even the Apocrypha of John. And I don't, again, I'm not saying I believe in all of Gnosticism. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that's a sexual pathology that's pervasive in the field. It appears as one thing until the sigils are placed, until the insemination occurs. And then at the moment, all three of them align themselves. Its true manifestation stares directly into the eyes of the experiencer, but she has to see it. Now, this is why the Witch of Endor in Hebrew, it's called a hapax legomenon. It's a linguistic term meaning that she's the only one ever described this way in the entire Holy Writ. She's a one-off. We don't have anything preceding her, nothing before, nothing after. She's a species all on her own. And the text says that she is a ma'alat uv. In Hebrew, that means she is the mistress. Ooh, boy. Mistress of the image. What are we talking about? Of the dead. And dare I say, for those, because there's a linguistic play on words employed in the Canaanite way of saying Abba for father is Uv. What I'm connecting here linguistically is that I think we're discovering who the real father of that child is. It's an entity. Just same entities that manifested the Witch of Endor are the same entities fathering their own species within hybridism. Now, that term father, which we would call Uv in Hebrew, also means revenant, one who returns. So we have a father that's returning through the son. And so what I'm trying to do, and I'm not doing a very good job of it because I'm still trying to explain it to my own self sometimes, like this doesn't make sense. What it appears, again, is that the ancient necromantic ritual, for instance, let me unpack this for a second. The word Uv in necromancy, specifically biblical antiquity, had three definitions. It was a device in the mouth of the medium to help amplify the voice of the returning entity. It's communication. Number two, it was the material image, fetus, of the returning entity. That's why they possessed images, right? Their definition is that it's the entity that's returning itself. So my point is that hybridism is centered around the Uv. It's spelled O-B in Hebrew, Uv. That is that the fetus that they're using to replicate their species, it is the amplifier of their own consciousness, helps them communicate in this dimension. Number two, it is the biological avatar of the consciousness possessing it. And number three, it's the returning species within it, which places us in the context of not fighting them physically, but exercising the spirits within.
It's all about the mind.
Absolutely.
Whoa.
It takes hybridism, as we were taught, not you and I, but in terms of like ufology, it's like, yeah, you guys, they're not even scratching the surface of it. And this is what, okay, well, it's sleep paralysis. It is. Yeah, but but we can now have access to, like I said, again, a contextual framework in which to discuss this phenomenon in historical narratives. Their intention then has not changed. Terminologies have, but the pathology and the ritual behind it has always been present.
So it's almost as if when we're talking about altars, it's almost as if like the body itself actually becomes an altar.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. The body itself becomes a living sigil. See, these experiencers, this is one of the darkest pathologies of everything, at least in my mind, is that I have cases that I'm collecting, and I'm working with one gentleman now, and I mentioned this in the past in interviews. That's fine. People are like, well, you said it before. I know. I'm not just going to make up new cases, right? No, for the sake of entertainment, I'm just going to make up. No. His mother was returned with sigils from head to toe. And if evangelicals, the people I grew up with, if we're just convinced, fill a little bit of holy water up. It is what it is. Even the threshold covenant. Well, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, that's interesting. It's entertaining until you start to realize that if in fact there is a battle, let's just suggest there's going to be, or at least the manifestation of the sons of God versus the sons of whatever these species are, whatever, that it's going to take people who are just as dedicated to their craft as the others. People like one guy I grew up watching was Jonathan Suter, fasting, deeply in tune, right? Why? Because a Hail Mary, as I've already demonstrated, if we're dealing with something that can walk up in front of you and take a picture of it, it doesn't show up, right? Is infinitely more complex and more powerful. And again, people say I always give the power. No, I give understanding. I give, right, historicity behind what we're dealing with. It's going to take a lot more commitment on our end. It's worth having and worth doing. But anyways,
No, I know. I think it's 100%. I mean, it is as soon as I started going down this route and then experiencing things, because as you've said, it's like the more we look at it, the more we start to, and although we're not looking at it to be like, oh, let's
Right.
play. No.
Absolutely.
The more we start to study it, the more we're actually experiencing it. And for me, that was the number one thing. And I'm always stressing this. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm always telling people in the soul deliverance in my ministry, like fasting has to be
Yeah.
an important part of the surrender to God's will. It's like
Mhm.
that is the giving up of our soul, the world, and all of that to go. It like we have to. It says in the end, or whatever you want to call it. There's been many end times that it will give over. I don't know
Yeah.
the exact scripture. It's like Revelation somewhere between 17 and 20 that talks about we'll give, or they will give their minds to the beast, to the system, right? And I
Yeah.
believe this is exactly what we're talking about, because
Oh, yeah.
I believe that the soul, being a spirit being, has a consciousness, right? So it holds the mind, the will, and the emotions. It's made up of subatomic particles, where the body is the manifestation, right, of what the soul believes and what we think. So this is why the world wants to program us to believe certain things and have a narrative,
Yep.
have that distraction with the illusion. And then even people, I've seen it, they constantly think negative. Well, then they end up
Mm.
becoming sick. And
Yeah.
which is exactly, we will become exactly what we think, right? And I believe that the
Oh, yeah.
soul, that the soul can split during trauma. This is kind of what I've been seeing in the spirit,
Yeah.
is that the soul splits during trauma, and those subatomic particles are released into the spirit, and they become quantumly entangled outside of space and time, right? But they still contain a portion of the mind, the will, and the emotions of the core soul, but it's still quantumly connected to the core soul. And I believe
Mhm.
somehow that the kingdom of darkness is using those soul fragments, I call them soul fragments, to create a collective consciousness, or some people call it a hive mind, cosmic
Mhm.
consciousness, world consciousness, whatever, right? So
Mhm.
do you think that that is how the phenomenon is actually operating? And I
Of
say
course.
this because I noticed
Absolutely.
that once I started doing soul deliverance, I felt like I wasn't as accessible to them. And I also felt like
Mhm.
I hit something in the spirit
Oh, yeah.
that they were like, oh, what are you doing to our reality?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. There's evidence to suggest that so if an entity could possess one person, that's kind of where a lot of demonology begins and ends, right? Oh, that's cute. That's cool. That makes sense. There are case studies where the same intelligence is fragmenting its consciousness in many people. Now, this is what one of the cases. It's called the Ursuline possessions at a convent, and it teaches people how to test the spirits, or in fact, how that they should too, at least. Where one nun is in bed at night, and she sees her favorite confessor manifest next to her. So she doesn't. She's obviously freaked out. She says her prayers and everything. One begins to communicate. I'm so and so. Oh, by the way, blah blah blah. We see this all the time in ufology, right? Oh, I'm Mother Mary. Like, oh, sure you are. You know what I mean? They wouldn't do that to Michael Heiser. He'd be like, yeah, you're right. Sure, Mother Mary. Have a seat and let's talk. He'd probably end up baptized in the end. It'd be hilarious. A little bit longer than usual, obviously. Then all of a sudden, like that nun doesn't really say anything until the next morning. So the next morning, she's talking to some of the other nuns over breakfast, and another nun comes and goes, you wouldn't believe what happened to me last night. What happened? My favorite priest. It's the second woman. Yeah, my favorite priest showed up in my room. That's kind of weird, right? And then the possessions took place, and their conclusion was that they weren't separate entities. They weren't even separate priests. Obviously, they were a singular intelligence, and this is something it's all throughout the pathology of the phenomenon. Once people understand that, they'll realize, okay, it may not even be a ghost, an apparition. It might be something that's wearing that as a mask. They realized that it wasn't separate entities, obviously not separate confessors and priests, but it was a singular intelligence that was fragmenting itself in both rooms. And so, yeah, it's unfortunately again that in order for us to grasp where we are in the conversation, people think, okay, we're in Exodus, right? Oh God, first he's got to get you out of Egypt, and then he's got to get Egypt out of you. Oh, here's an offering. No, we are exactly where we think we are. It's not our imagination. It's the depth of the darkness, the depth of discernment we will need in this gross darkness. We need to understand. And a lot of us aren't fully appreciating that because a lot of, specifically people outside, they are not willing to have conversations like you and I are having. Yes, it hurts to grow. It's really uncomfortable to grow out of the dogma into the data, but it's in the data that will give us the utility we need to discern the times.
So staying on the quantumly entanglement theory for a
Yeah.
minute, could practitioners who are alive today be seeking the essence or the soul, right? And it sounds kind of like similar to what was happening in that situation, of which would be the soul fragments of people that passed on, maybe even past practitioners, right, in this
Hmm.
craft. Um,
Yeah.
and then deliverance ministers calling them, familiar spirits. New Age
Right.
calls them guides, right? Or ascended
Hmm.
masters. So could what they're actually communicating with be parts of that soul, the original soul, or maybe a
Our
formation of a
soul.
bunch of soul
Okay.
fragments?
Yeah. So the only thing I could say in that direction is that whatever we're dealing with does have a preternatural access to knowledge. One of my late friend Paulino, he was in a seminary as a young man, and he was invited. He worked like later on in his career, he worked with who was it? William Hall in the Bridgeport poltergeist case study in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And then he was with Ed and Lorraine Warren a lot too in some of their investigations. But anyways, prior to that, he was a part of a seminary. He was getting schooling there. And his professors and one of his priests asked him, "Hey, Paul, would you like to go with us on an exorcism?" And Paul's like, "Yeah." But Paul didn't believe in any of it. He was there for theology. He had a fascination with it. And so he gets into this house, I think it was, and there is this demoniac and this woman foaming at the mouth, flailing around. And in his head, he says, "This is baloney," which was not like, even Paul was like, yeah, afterwards, I deeply regretted it. But all of a sudden, again, the phenomenon went, snap to attention. And the priests were like, "Uh-oh, Paul, this was all chaotic before, but now you're her target or its target." And
And
so,
did he say it out loud or he thought
no,
it?
he thought it.
Thought it.
And so the entity, through the mouth of the demoniac, spoke what's called Malay. It's a dead language. And it's not uncommon in possession cases, of course. Um, but what it said to him was very, very, very sinister. It wasn't, in fact, until he graduated from seminary. Here's your certificate. Here's your degree. We want to have lunch with you in about a week. Oh, what's this about? Well, now that you're out of seminary, we want to share what happened. So, summed up. Paul, we don't really know too much about your family history. And we've waited to tell you this because we didn't want it to affect your studies. But here's the language it was speaking. It was speaking perfect Malay. It's a dead language. Here's what it said. "Hi, Paul. I was there when your father unalived himself, and I'm the one that made him pull the trigger." So people, without worshiping, no, I'm not saying that. People don't appreciate this. They cannot fully comprehend it. And and again, my whole purpose in telling the story is that I don't know where they're getting the information from. I suspect that what that entity did was just go deeper into the recesses of Paulino's mind, going through all of the scarifications throughout his life. And I'm telling you, he gave a lecture, him and Ben gave a lecture on this at the Exeter conference, I think a few years ago now. Pulled out the wound. Oh, not only do I know about it, now I was there with me, Paul. So people don't get that. Now, that's only if and when the phenomenon is plucked it out of our own minds. But the phenomenon has, because you're getting to where, I'm getting to how, right? Because we're asking the same question different ways. There are case studies, like one of them, my friend Joshua Cutchin talks about in his book, Ecology of Souls, where someone is taken by the phenomenon, meets a person that says, "Oh, by the way, I died. This is uncomfortable." Especially, "I died. Here's my name, my phone number, my address. You come back from the abduction. So and so died today." So that's something, again, that is not a projection of us. I have no knowledge you even exist, much less that you died, much less that you died today.
So I'm hearing um, what I would hear the, deliverance ministers
Yeah.
of today say, "Oh, well, that was just a demon, a familiar spirit that
Yeah.
knew because they've been following the generational
Yeah.
bloodline." I'm curious,
I
like,
hope
what do
that's
you
the
tell those
case.
people?
Well, I hope that's the case. I mean, that would be amazing. How easy, right? Oh, that's just blah, 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 blah. And the familiar spirit term, again, it gets abused, right? I was always told that's a familiar spirit. Okay, familiar in what way? there's two familiars in history. There's the familiar which they lean on, where it's like, oh yeah, well that was just an entity cultured and groomed by a practitioner, right? It's an animal or something, and then it would come to the practitioner, give them information, and that's one of their familiars. But there's a second familiar that people don't know about. This is from the work of T. Whitten Davies, for those who, again, the bibliophiles out there. Uh-oh. Nathaniel's making a book reference. Read it. Demonology among the Hebrews and their neighbors.
Oh,
Familiars, specifically within necromancy. In one of the definitions, and they were called familiars, by the way, and it's actually the original term that was later on bastardized. The original familiar was a spirit that descended into Sheol, but was still familiar enough with this world to communicate with a necromancer.
okay. I did a deliverance workshop, oh gosh, a while ago about, I think it was demonology or something like that. I wish I
Yeah.
knew you then. And I was like, because I go down, that book would have been really cool. But I remember finding something that in the familiar spirit, in the Hebrew, but also in the Greek, that connected it actually to a disembodied soul, a disembodied
There you
spirit, which
go.
also said soul. And I thought,
Yep.
oh my gosh, but again, unless we are willing to do the research,
Yeah, we'll never know.
we'll just go along with the narrative that the, theology professor or, the
Right.
Bible school professor told us, which those places are so infiltrated, it's not even funny.
No, and I don't enjoy that, to be honest with you. I don't enjoy that kind of research. Okay. Because again, everything that we've used to inform our perception of demonology it's evolving. Like in 2008, the University of Chicago employed a group of archaeologists to go to Turkey. It's called the Zincirli expedition. And so in the middle of one of their excavations, they uncovered a sarcophagus, a sarcophagi from this guy named Katamua, and it's called the Katamua inscription. And in his inscription, again, the only reason we know what our ancient ancestors believed is because they told us. That's really it. We're not imagining this. So, and mainly it's through material culture, which is commonly known as archaeology. And so they dug up this writing, and it's Katamua, and Katamua employs the Aramaic word nepes, which the Hebrew word is nefesh. And right, again, and so, but his concept was this. He said, my nefesh, nepes, will possess this sarcophagus.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that
And
is
so,
soul. That is, oh my
oh, I
gosh.
got chills, right? Let's go.
Oh,
And let's
whoa.
go, right? High five. People, again, they're like, well, that's not what the Family Christian Bookstore says. It's like, right, because that's not up-to-date research. This is still being done, and we're still realizing it, right? There are still calcified remains of revelation in the earth that we're uncovering. And so it's from the Zincirli expedition and what's called the Katamua inscription that it created a new conversation in academia. Wait a minute. They did believe in disembodied souls. Absolutely. And so then they had to retroactively go out through scripture and say, okay, what about when was that word nefesh uttered, written? In what context? And why is it that they always possessed images? It's going to blow your mind. Why is it that they also required altars and sacrifices? And so that, again, it's like people always like, oh, well, the demonic hypothesis, that question was answered a long time ago. These other guys, they're way different. They want altars. Well, so did disembodied souls. And so that's where necronetics comes in. It's very strategic, but it's literally again combining all of this literature, these theories, and suggesting, hey, listen, there's room here for a little bit of reinterpretation, not dogmatism, not heresy, but the conversation needs to be had. And so, anyways, but I thought that was a fascinating addition to the research.
Yes. Wow. Wow. I
No,
mean, yeah, that answers it right there. So for all those of you that are thinking, oh, but this is all just demons and familiar spirits, that's how they're able to know it. We got to take the time to
oh,
research and yeah.
of the ways that the phenomenon replicated through idolatry, specifically within biblical antiquity, was it is found in the way that they would do their burial. They're called burial practices. And so there's what's called head magic, where it stemmed from Egyptology and Egyptian sorcery, where the practitioner, in order to communicate with whatever entity that is, would create what's called an oov. It's a mechanism, or it's an amplifier. They would take a piece of metal and carve the name of an unclean spirit. By the way, an unclean spirit was consciousness that was once from human. Just throwing that out there. Carve the name of unclean spirit into the piece of metal, and you'll see what Kademu was trying to do. It wasn't like he just made it up. The belief was that the entity would merge its mind, old mind, with new matter. And then it would plant that piece of metal underneath the tongue of a corpse, necronetics. In the phenomenon, after successfully, again, we're looking at hybridism in its early embryonic stages, no pun intended, merging old memory with new matter, it begins to reanimate the corpse, at least from the head up. And now that piece of oof, which by the way, we already talked about, it's right, it's a piece of equipment in the mouth of the medium, which the corpse now is. It's the entity itself speaking, and it's the material body the entity's possessing. All three of them collapsed, not horizontally, vertical, collapsed into one in real time. Now the phenomenon is speaking through the metal to the practitioner. Hey, thank you for helping me incarnate into this dimension. Thank you. Now, that originated in Egyptology. We have mummies that were buried with gold slither. They would take gold, wrap it around their tongues, and then bury them. The idea was that one day the phenomenon, right, would merge old memory with new matter and reanimate those who were deceased. So there's room for a discussion.
Which could be what is happening today, where they are contacting and they are using these entities that were buried thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, and then they're probably
Mhm.
still continuing to do that, which then goes into the whole like metals and chemtrails
Oh, yeah.
and all of that of what they're trying to release to us to maybe then use that as maybe a point of contact.
Oh, my goodness. Let me put this up there. So there are members of our federal government that are performing these same esoteric rituals in order to get metamaterial and nanotechnology. Point one. Point two, Richard Banderick, who was a recent whistleblower. He has his own aerospace company, but he worked for Skunk Works and I believe Lockheed Martin. His testimony recently was that 40 years ago, this gets back to what I was talking about earlier, where some scientists out in the desert unalive themselves, same desert. Again, it's crazy. But anyways, his thing was, look, he goes, I used to work for a company within the government, and there's a contract with the government. He said that we were given specific areas of the country to look. We'd go out there, and he said we would collect metamaterials, small pieces of metal. This is gonna blow your mind, my friend. He said, but when we would put it in our hand. If it did not align with us, it would dematerialize into dust. Right?
So that
So
actually would make sense on the atomic level, right? So
Mhm.
if somebody has incorporated an entity, knowingly
Mhm.
or unknowingly, and their atomic structure, I mean, you talk about the DNA and all of that, but the atomic structure, which is where the metal, whatever
Right.
these elements are, is able to maybe create power or
Mhm.
energy connecting with something that has the same subatomic particles in their
Right.
structure. That way, if they hold it,
Yeah.
it maybe even becomes stronger. That person becomes stronger. And if they don't, that body actually kills it. We become the parasite for it.
Yeah. I like that idea. Let me take that a step further. The phenomenon is seeding our species with technology that was not designed for us. It's seeding our species with technology designed for practitioners here on Earth.
So
If it,
basically, they can then take over.
there we go.
Yeah,
Boop.
you're
And
right.
here
Mic
comes the
drop.
practitioner, right? And now you've created a direct line of incarnation. And I'm not just making that up. Like that's not a theory. What's happening now are there are experiencers, abductees, who our government is pulling aside. We're not like literally, it's like, okay, I don't even know if these beings are telling you the truth about who they are. That's not really what I care about now. This happened with Chris Bledsoe. Hold your hand out, Mr. Bledsoe. Let's see, does it devolve into dust or not? And so, what I'm suggesting here, and again, the church needs to pay very close attention to this. What I'm suggesting is that it's a race for time. I'm suggesting our government knows this, and they're looking for who the phenomenon is actually intending to seed with this technology. it's attempting to incarnate once more. And this kind of this blending, and I was watching oh my God, how could I ever John Lennox, Professor John Lennox the other day. He's talking about transhumanism in another guy named his name is Jordy Rose. And this is again technology. Except another conversation the other day with a researcher, ufologist, just okay, what is technology? What is it actually? I think there's genuine technology, but I think there's an occult technology that we're getting. And in fact, Jordy Rose is creating what has been determined to be a technological Ouija board, where the phenomenon seeds us with this technology. And then when we create, and this is what Jordy Rose and others are doing, it's called quantum computers, and then creating this technological Ouija board in order to conjure the phenomenon, to bring them in closer to our species. The real problem is that comes with the illusion of control. If the technology did not originate from us anyways, then that would not place us in the context of us conjuring them. It would place us in the context of them conjuring us. And so that's what Jordy Rose is doing. Essentially, he said, we're creating these quantum computers because we're hoping to attract living organisms. And his lecture was on, I think it was conjuring demons or something, because he didn't really even know how to articulate it. But that was his goal. And so that's what my fear is that this new technology we're getting, it going back to antiquity, right? It wasn't just metal. It's not just a scientific method. The phenomenon was merging its old memory with new matter. We're thinking this is incredible. No, we're not thinking this is a further incarnation of this intelligence.
It's almost like um, a super consciousness that
Yep.
they are now. And it's interesting because you said something about, accessing the files of that guy's mind to be able to
Yeah.
source back to like, okay, not only that, let's, trigger him. Let's,
Yeah.
take him to another level by bringing something up. And which is interesting because as I started researching the soul and going deeper into soul deliverance, I stopped wasting the time on, all the demons and the spirits and all that. I was like, wait a minute, the key is the soul. That's
Mhm.
when I experienced some of the most warfare. But at the same
Yep.
time, I was also experiencing the most breakthrough. So I knew I was onto something. It's like
Right,
you get
right.
hit a gold mine here. Let's just, be careful from here how to go, right?
Mhm.
So with that shift came a flood of people like into the ministry, most of which actually ended up being undercover. Like they were witches. Some of them were
Mhm.
MK Ultra unknowingly, right? Because they were there to record and report. But overall,
Mhm.
they were literally on assignment there to basically take the information that I was receiving and
Mhm.
take me off course so that I would then start giving a mixture of lies and truth, right? But because of the soul fragmentation that I still had at the time, because this is very new in my soul deliverance, I was easily accessed by one of those, the lady I was talking about, the entity, I believe. I believe maybe she was some sort of an incarnation. Now I met with her in person twice, which is really odd too. When I go back to it, I'm like, why wasn't I more aware of, the fact
Mhm.
that this person moves to be close to me, happens to live close to me. Um,
Mhm.
anyways, after I figured out who she was and some of the other people in the ministry and removed them by God's direction, um,
Mhm.
I sat with the Lord because it really rocked me. It really rocked my world that number one, I allowed it to happen, that I didn't hear God, that God didn't say, Anne, hold on a minute. You're
Mhm.
completely surrounded by a bunch of, I'll just call them evildoers. So the Lord told me, his words said, this was his words. They have accessed every file that used those words. He said, they've accessed every file, every memory.
Mhm.
And it literally took me fasting and prayer, literal determination to get back to hearing the voice of God, but also really believing that it was his voice. Because once you've
Right.
been fooled, you have this doubt that like strangles you, right? It's like you have this blurred reality. Wait, what is true? What is not true? Which is all rooted in fear. But
Mhm.
God had to take me through this process of literally, I sat down. Like as soon as I knew, I sat down on my couch and I said, I am not leaving here. I'm not leaving my couch until you tell me and show me everything
Hmm.
and I want to know it's you. And I said, I will sit here as long as I have to. I will only leave to go to the bathroom. I'm not eating. I'm not drinking, nothing. I'm staying right here until I feel peace about this.
Hmm.
And it was a solid 18 hours. I did
Wow.
not sleep. And what God did is that he took me through. This is when he said they accessed every file, every memory that you've ever had. But he said,
Okay.
I'm going to show you something right now that nobody knows. And those were the experiences. Whew, I have
Mhm.
chills. Those were the experiences, those personal relationship times that I had with the Father in prayer before
Mhm.
the infiltration, that it was only me and him. And I never told anybody about those experiences. So he took me back through these experiences and he said, I'm showing you this because I want you to know who I am right now, that this is me. This is not this counterfeit. It's nothing that you're afraid of. I want to show you. He just very lovingly, like just an amazing father. He just took me through these memories that only I had
Mhm.
shared with him. And it was able to bring me back into like, okay, like everything's like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Right. And this is where
Mhm.
I've completely drastically changed my contact with people now. Right.
Good.
Um, because the Lord showed me that they were on assignment to divert or control what was literally released to Christians, especially when it
Mhm.
comes to the soul, specifically to soulmates. Because
Interesting.
I was talking about the soulmates that God designed for us in the beginning, which I believe is like that's coming back to oneness with the Father.
Yeah, it is the twin soul, right?
Yeah.
Where one mystical teaching was that it's one soul, two bodies, and it's their soulmates.
Could the phenomenon be changing our memories rather than having actual different timelines? Like, could
Yeah.
the phenomenon be like where it's the Mandela effect, right? That
Right.
they're using the Mandela effect to test our ability of mass mind control.
Oh yeah, yeah, most definitely. So it's reminiscent of one of Dr. Carla Turner's cases that I mention often, where there's a woman, another woman, right? Yeah, I told you the phenomenon. And again, it's not negative towards women. The phenomenon just, I don't know, it's pathology. It's cool. It's interesting. Anyway, so this woman was out with her family. I think it was the 4th of July. And they're out they had a barbecue at the house. Everything's going fine. And then above the house, across the street, there materializes this metallic object. It's just hovering there. And she is talking to Dr. Turner, and she goes, and I don't know what any of this means. She goes, I'm just going to tell you what happened. She said for the next 45 minutes, it allowed us to look at it, watch it. She said, I even had binoculars in my hand showing them, and people are looking at it with binoculars. She goes, I have a telescope, and I pulled out my telescope, and we're observing this object for 45 minutes. She said finally it leaves, and she goes, and it was strange. She goes, the next day I woke up and the telescope was still in the new packaging that it was shipped to me. She said, Dr. Turner, I don't even own binoculars. I don't
So do you think that maybe because
know.
of this whole like trying to push the UFOs, do you think that was maybe downloaded, that memory was downloaded into
Of
her mind
course.
while she was sleeping?
Oh yeah. I think that, and this gets down into the observer effect, where in quantum mechanics, when you observe the phenomenon, you fundamentally alter the phenomenon you're observing. What I told you about the Ma'alaruv, she had to see it. The experiencers. I have cases where it's different. The entity's different from the peripheral. But once you lock eyes with it, once you observe it, this is by changing it, observing it, measuring it, quantifying it, we are collapsing. That's what it is. You're collapsing different ways, collapsing different forms, ghosts, aliens. That's the question we've always been asking, right? Ghosts, aliens, apparitions, incubi. We're collapsing various forms of the same intelligence. This is the observer effect. This is why you have people that are on the highways, right? And they see, some people don't even see it. But when it is witnessed, none of them can actually agree on what it looked like. Different lights, different shape. Why? It is present. Something's present. But and I've taught this in recent lectures and interviews, it's seeking to be seen. Once we observe it, it collapses itself into an archetype. seeks to be seen so that it can hide from us. I am your, right? I'm your deceased husband. Okay. Yeah, come here. I am. As they're observing it, it constructs before our mind can even process it. It's got the archetype. There we go. Now, I've had cases, my friend, where the phenomenon is not just different from the peripheral, but when it leaves observation, and then the female looks at the entity, there's the learning matrix employed. That's why I was talking about the learning matrix behind the observer effect, to where the phenomenon can only hold the shape it's in for a certain amount of time. Yeah, that's what I think we're dealing with, right? There's a difference. And that's why, again, I always teach, like, it's not about what it looks like or what it says it is. What is its pathology? What are the bloody footprints in the snow? It's like the alias of the alien. Yeah, but why are you performing rituals on women? Oh, well, they try to back out of that, right? It's like, okay, yeah, they're sigils. Explain that, and they don't want to. And so when you were getting back to, at least I was, I think at one point, getting back to the Ursuline possessions, when I said it fragmented its consciousness, right? You get into the dissociation identity disorder, right? Where this is, yeah, where it's the ID, where it's separating itself. Now we're understanding the nature of the phenomenon a little bit more, to where it's here, it's manifesting. That's a measure of incarnation. But when it incarnates, it's the observer effect. Now, to further prove this point, my friend, you're going to catch it. That are being led to go outside and observe.
Almost sounds like a false counter, or like a false or a counterfeit Holy Spirit or something. If these people are Christians, right? Like, oh, well,
Yeah,
God,
it's oh my God, yeah, absolutely. And so now it's like, well, to see if oh my God, well, I was just called. I don't know why I looked over there. Okay, did you see anything? Well, that's why I was looking. No, that's why you were called to observe. The phenomenon was using the observer effect to incarnate. And then they go around, right? And we've seen this in the field. It's the same thing with apparitions, the same thing with ghosts, the same things with aliens. Well, I'm a witness. Yeah, but do you really understand that what you observed may not at all be what was there? And so you know what they're doing now, my friend? They're starting to realize what they're witnessing with their eyes is different than what they're capturing on camera. Oh my God. Which means, right? The camera's here. I'm focused on it, which means they're putting their trust into an archetype.
which can then be, this kind of goes into what I wanted to talk about, and we can always do, I
Yeah,
would love to have you back for a second
absolutely. We
interview.
got a lot more to cover, my friend.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm almost wondering because I always have been saying this, like everything happens in the spirit first, right?
Mhm.
So if in the spirit, when people are sleeping, when they're in the unconscious state, and even the Testament of Reuben talks about this, that in the sleep state, beware of air spirits is what it actually says.
Absolutely.
And then
Yep.
it also says something about the trance of like a
Trance
death.
states. There
Yeah.
we go. Oh my God. I started theorizing about the observer effect here, right? Like, okay, there's a problem here. I started dealing in researching what's called aggressive mimicry, where species, especially in the ocean, and parasitic species at that, in order to invade, it will, or to hide, it will blend into its own reality. And so, right,
Reptilians
there
too.
we
Well, I
go.
guess that
All of, yes, absolutely. Oh my God, it's the incubus. They're blending into the reality of the mind through the observer effect. Again, right? I'm sorry, I'm getting real passionate here.
this is
So
good. This is good.
this is the this is, yeah. So I emailed my friend in England, and this is what I said. I know you have clearances, but I stumbled upon something, and I'm not claiming I'm the first to. That's not like, well, I'm on some Mount Olympus. No, my point is, if this is true, we have a serious problem. And he goes, hit me. All right. So I explained, it's us. What? Yes. It's hiding from us by wishing to be observed by us. So break it down. CE5. I got chills. I want to, God, I got chills, man. Because you feel that? It's weird. Because there's a difference between manifestation. When it wants to incarnate, it will seek to be observed. And so I said, all right, break it down for me. He said, well, in one of our projects, we were measuring brain scans when the phenomenon was present. And they were being induced into trances, just like sleep paralysis, just like, right? Just like that catatonic, hypnagogic state where the phenomenon was seeking to be observed. and then literally inducing them into a trance. You ready for this, guys? We're going to be watching this. That way, they'll go home telling people, I saw a UFO with something else completely different incarnated. So that's heavy. That cost me. That cost me. Depression, suicidal ideation. I get this close to the abyss, and I'm telling you, this is how it works. You mentioned it earlier, right? And then all of a sudden, an influx of just revelation. It comes through, and I'm like, oh my God. And I'm telling you, I guess we can conclude this, do another show if you want. But my point is, that's why these scientists are this close and then found in the desert with a gun in their mouth. So the research I'm doing, I've got to be very careful with it. There's still some things I haven't shared because I know it's like, okay, I've got to verify this. And some of I've verified it, but I have to release a little bit because if I release too much, it will come after me like it has in the past. But my point is there's something that seeks to be observed. And the reason it wants to be seen is because it wants to hide. It wants to appear as one thing. And then meanwhile, something else is a hitchhiker and begins to manifest in our reality in ways that we are not even perceiving.
So glad you touched on the hitchhiker. Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
then it just like I believe that could be what is happening when I've heard your other interviews with hitchhiker effect. I
Yeah.
believe that is what is happening in all religions, all churches. Like it's just taking the truth, it's shattering it, scattering it too throughout a bunch of religions, take pieces of the truth, and then especially in the Christian church, because those that are aligned with well, I'm not going to say God's will because most of the people in the church and the institution of the church are not aligned with God's will, but they think they are. They think that they're experiencing a Holy Spirit
Yeah.
or God Himself. But this hitchhiker effect, if it's whether knowingly or unknowingly, manifesting through the top of the leadership, through the pastors, the ministers, the
Yep.
board, then it can
Nailed it.
flow right down.
Yep, yep. Like the anointing from the top of the head to the bottom of the beard. You're right. You're right. And I mentioned Apostle David E. Taylor, and he's one of them. And I think it's all fascinating research, right? And as dark as it is. And but David Taylor was, I mean, my God, funneling millions of dollars rather, out of his own ministry and buying mansions and Jaguars and grooming women within his leadership for sexual favors. Now here's this. In return, you're going to see Jesus. One of them was a very prominent gospel singer. Forget her name, but even if I knew it, I wouldn't mention it. She was caught up in it. And I mean, like, and she admits it now, but like, yeah, here's my body, like just the whole 9 yards. And the one thing that kept her there was that Jesus came to her in the middle of the night. Again, man, there's what's called the oath curse that's mentioned by David in the book of Psalms. The oath curse is, some people say that it was the origin of the Watchers, where the tradition says that they had an anointing and unction upon them, and only because they swore to an oath to God. Here's my oath. And so God gave them an anointing, and David mentions this in his own life. Um, and that anointing preserves them as long as they keep the oath. This is heavy stuff here. The moment they break the oath, they'll still be anointed. But it's a different unction. It's an unclean unction. The same anointing that preserved their life will go inward to defile it. And I think some people are in contact with false prophets, with people who are underneath the auspices of an unclean unction. And because it feels a little bit like an oath, it feels a little bit like it's not a blessing, it's a curse. And the scary thing is when we're dealing with these principalities and powers, the phenomena has the ability to weaponize it. And because they don't have the ability, they don't even have the desire to test the spirit. They don't even have the ability because they're in sin. They're doing something, right? And this entity manifests. And remember what I told you? Practitioner. He's a practitioner in contact with the phenomenon. They're working together. And when that person, oh, you're going to leave? Fine. Okay. Phenomenon incarnates a manifestation. Stay here. If you see and receive another Jesus. So the discernment starts within, and then it exudes out. I enjoy doing this because my research, hopefully, it does kind of expand in different areas, and I usually talk to people about the occult, and I've never really conversed this way with somebody of your caliber and your background, so I'm very, very honored to be on with you.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel. I do want to say to all those listeners that stayed through all this, thank you. But one of the things I do want to say is that it is important, even as Nathaniel, right? You're saying that to stay conscious. And if we are staying conscious, then we will be able to hopefully have the discernment. Now, I also believe, because I am a believer of Yeshua, of Jesus Christ of Nazareth being my savior, right? That when we can do that and we can stay conscious in the truth that our Father has given us, that when we encounter a counterfeit, that we'll be able to discern from it. But I also believe that it's important for us to have our own relationship, and this is why I'm very adamant about people not being part of a church because of the hitchhiker, because of the soul ties and everything else, the programming that comes with it, that we have our own personal relationship with the Lord in the fasting, in the prayer, in the surrendering of what this world's programming has. So I just encourage everybody to first of all, make sure that you're not in fear about what we talked about. Forgive yourself of any fear. Forgive us if we triggered you in any form of a way of offense or whatever it might be. We do ask for forgiveness. That's not our intention. Our intention is to bring the truth, as hard as it might be, or chewy as it might be, or tart and sour as it might be. It's still going to be the truth. So I do also suggest that for those of you that are like struggling with those realities, all these different realities, maybe even brought something to mind of like, oh my gosh, I had this experience, that I do recommend for those that want to go deeper in their in the true reality to come check out the Ministry of Advocates of Heaven. So Nathaniel, thank you. I would love to have you back. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions after this is posted. Again, thank you so much for spending all this time with me. I know it ran a lot longer than we probably expected. So thank you for your research and your dedication to it. I know it is not easy. We literally have to die to this world to be all in for the truth, according to God's will. So thank you for being the truth, the true light bearer, and a hammer. Is there anything else that you want to share before we sign off?
Well, first of all, it's my quote that I usually end every show with. It's, they're playing by different rules because they're playing a different game. And a part of the obfuscation, a part of the propaganda on the phenomenon's side is to get us to misunderstand it, right? Oh, I believe they're doing this. And it's like, well, okay, what does the data say? Suggest, what does it say? So that's when we have to grow out of dogma and grow into the data. But if anybody wants to contact me, my email is njgillis@yahoo.com, and you guys can obviously follow my YouTube with all my interviews playlist I have there. And also, like, if you really want to be closer to me in terms of like social media, I'm always on Instagram. So I post on there like at least 2 or 3 times a week to kind of, and I even just did a Q&A on there for I think an hour, 10 minutes.
That was great.
Yeah, thank you. It was I had to do it on my phone because I was still learning the whole setup with my new laptop. But you are a new friend of mine, and I'm thankful that we have connected. And thank you for having me on to discuss my research.
Oh my gosh, thank you. All of Nathaniel's contact information will be below in the comments. His YouTube channel, his Instagram account, anything else that he has that he wants to share with you will also be below. And I do want to suggest to everybody that Nathaniel is working on a book called The Skin That Crawls.
Yes.
And you can pre-order it right now. I'm assuming I can't believe the price. So I'm assuming that's a super discounted price right now. I don't know if it's going to go up later.
It is for the pre-orders. And it's taken me a long time to write this book. I'm not lying. I'm just gonna be very upfront with you. When I discovered the observer effect, and I realized that, okay, I got to get this out. I got to get this out. And then every time I would get up to a breakthrough, I get an email or something, and I get a pushback from the phenomenon. It made me question, like, okay, do I even want to release it? Do I want to give this? It's one thing to do interviews. You put it in print. So, yes, I am writing it. You're going to love it, hopefully, and it will cover the observer effect and will include cases that I've never shared in interviews. And hopefully, at the end of the day, it will be appealing to everyone, not just the religious, not just the occult side, but people of all backgrounds will sit down and actually have a conversation about it.
Everything that we are sharing right now is based on the knowledge that we've received, the knowledge that we believe to be truth right now. And
Correct.
we do hold the right to change whatever that might be moving forward.
Yep.
And the kingdom of darkness has no legal right, no authority to come at us any form of a way for anything that we've released now that we end up changing later because of new revelations. Okay, well, that's a wrap. God bless you all. We love you.